Hey guys, welcome to Law Enforcement Week 3 Notes and Lecture. So last week we jumped right into talking about basic police tactics and some safety things. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, we need to back up and we need to talk about the laws and people's rights. And we start by talking about the U.S. Constitution. So you should write this down in your notebook, week 3. Make sure you number your weeks in your notes. And your first heading here is the U.S. Constitution. Some of this you may have learned already, and if you haven't, you absolutely will this year, your junior year, in your history class, American history class. So we're not going to talk about all of the parts of the U.S. Constitution, but there's quite a bit of it that does directly impact police officers and policing and how they do their job. So, and we have an ear here, so you can just listen. How do the police know what they can and cannot do in taking action? They start with the United States Constitution and the rights given to all U.S. citizens. The first 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution are called the Bill of Rights, and you should write this down. The Bill of Rights, and that's where we're going to start. So, the First Amendment, and again, you have your ear here, I have pasted exactly the wording in the amendment, and I'm going to have another document that I share with you. So you don't need to copy this word for word, but I am going to read it to you. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So this is the actual language. And of course, back then they talked differently than we talk today, and sometimes it can be hard to figure out what the heck they're trying to say. So I give you the actual language, and then we break it down into our plain English in today's world so that you can understand it. So the First Amendment, and the other thing is I want to point out to you, I don't know how familiar you are with Roman numerals, but capital I is the Roman numeral for 1. So the First Amendment, I want you to know the Roman numeral so you recognize it if you were to see it on a test. First Amendment is Roman numeral 1. So you're not copying this, but I would like you to copy this. Amendments 1, 2, and 4, 1, 2, and 4, affect police officers the most on the street and how they can or can't take enforcement action. The First Amendment protects everyone's right to freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, and freedom of assembly. So there are 4 things in the First Amendment. There are 4 protections in the First Amendment. We're talking about freedom of speech first. Any of us can say anything we want at any time. Mostly. And that's really important. It's italicized. Mostly. And you're going to find out that just about everything we talk about is not absolute 100%. There's always little exceptions. All right. So it's easier to talk about what you can't say than it is to talk about what you can say, because there's way more stuff you can say than can't. So any of us can say anything we want at any time, mostly. There are some exceptions. We can't, and we're going to have a little list on the next slide. We can't cause mass panic or fear. That's like yelling fire in a movie theater when there is no fire, when you know there is no fire. You can't do that. You can't give a false report. You cannot knowingly lie and tell the police something happened or somebody did something when you know full well they did not. That is actually a crime. It's called filing a false report. So you can't do that. You can't threaten anyone, even if it's just words. That's not allowed. So you can't threaten to hurt them or kill them or harm them in any way. You can't use what we call, quote, fighting words. And I don't want to get into it on a video right now, but we can certainly talk about this in person. There are certain words, certain people, certain groups find, what would be the word, just emotionally upsetting. Fighting words. Like if you say that to me, I am going to have a reaction, an extreme reaction. You can't use that. I guess, you know what? I guess you could also liken hate speech to something like fighting words. Fighting words, hate speech, same kind of idea. You can't be disorderly in public or disturb the peace. So, for example, you have your radio on in your car and it is blaring. It is so loud that other people's windows are vibrating. You're not going to be able to say it's my music, it's free speech. You're disturbing the peace because everybody else has a right too. They have a right to not have their windows shake out of their house or out of their car. They have a right to sleep. They have a right to have a conversation. They have a right to hear their television. You get the idea. So there's limits. There's limits. And being disorderly, screaming, you know what? Cursing. Cursing could be disorderly if it's loud enough that everybody else can hear it. Potentially, and I'm not saying this is what the rule, like this is what's on paper. It doesn't mean that every single officer makes an arrest or every single person who uses a swear word in public. Absolutely not. Okay, but technically, that is not going to be covered under the First Amendment. So I have some specific examples. So you should definitely write this down. And the next one, I mean, you can write this if you feel like you need to, or if you can just remember it. So I already gave you this first one, yelling fire in a crowded event when you know that there is no fire. Obviously, if you believe that there is a fire and you're trying to save people's lives, well, that's different, right? It's when you know that there isn't one. Well, now it becomes like during the investigation, the police, if they were going to charge you with making a false report or causing this mass panic or fear, they would have to know or show or prove that you had knowledge that there was no actual fire. So that gets like into the law and into the investigation. And that's what I think is really interesting about our field. So anyway, I digress. Making a report to the police that a crime was committed against you when it wasn't. So I kind of already mentioned that one. Telling someone you're going to kill or hurt them. Can't do that. Yelling a racial slur at a minority person or group. That's definitely hate speech. Or using fighting words is another way that you might hear that called. And actually, I think I gave you all these examples in the other slide. I didn't know this was coming. Screaming, swearing, loud music in public. And obviously, we're talking about extremes here. So those are not covered under the free speech, freedom of speech. And then, so remember, the First Amendment has 4 protections. The first one's speech. The second one is press. Freedom of the press. And what is the press? Oh. Sorry. Any of us can write anything we want at any time, mostly. All of the same rules apply here as with freedom of speech. So just think of speech and press is the exact same thing, except one is speaking verbally and the other is in writing, whether that's a newspaper, a book, a magazine, an article, and online posts, online stuff that you put out there, social media or otherwise, on websites, what have you. That's all considered press. And you have the same rights and exceptions as you do with speech. So I actually didn't give you a list for freedom of press because it is the exact same stuff. So let me just go back a couple here. You can't write a threat out to somebody. You can't give a sworn statement that you know is false. Sworn statement is a written statement. You can't, like those, so just take it from verbal and put it into writing, and it's the exact same stuff. So that brings us to our third right and protection, which is freedom of religion. Any of us can believe and practice any religion that we want, except we can't break any other laws while doing so. And most of our religions don't require us to break any laws, but I'm going to give you some examples. And there are some religions out there that endorse some of these behaviors, strangely enough. So I want you to write that down. Freedom of religion. Any of us can believe and practice any religion we want, except we can't break any other laws while doing so. So, for example, you cannot sacrifice animals. You can't use illegal drugs and say, oh, I'm having a religious ceremony. If that drug is illegal, there are some minor exceptions. I won't go too far into this, but actually Native Americans do have permission to use certain substances that are illegal for everyone else, like peyote, as long as it is actually being used during a religious ceremony and not just recreational use. But that's like a really obscure exception. Pretty much anything else that's illegal, you're not going to be able to go, oh, it's my religion. Domestic violence, child abuse, these are not going to be accepted just because you say it's part of your religion. So these are the exceptions. But basically, you can believe anything else you want to believe. I know that's a nasty, disgusting picture, but I'm just trying to give the example of, some of these whacked out groups that might actually believe in some of these things. And our fourth right that is protected under the First Amendment is our freedom of assembly. That is to get together. Any of us can be with or gather with anyone we want, except we can't break any other laws while doing so. And this picture cracks me up. What's this sign say? No loitering. What is loitering? Loitering is standing around in groups or even by yourself and just hanging around doing nothing, just standing there. There are businesses that don't want that. You're not there, you're not shopping, you're not spending money, you're just hanging around outside their door for whatever reason. And depending on the environment, the situation, other customers may feel uncomfortable walking through this group of people to get into the store, and therefore they may be dissuaded from going in. And so stores may have rules, and there's rules about that. And if it says no loitering, then you're not going to have, freedom of assembly to stand there. And private property is different than public property. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well. So our next slide some examples of what you can't do under freedom to assemble is trespass on private property. If that property is privately owned, by an individual or a business, they have the right, because they own the property, and if they don't want you on it, they can say so. You can't be here. So you don't have the right to trespass. That's a crime. You typically are not going to be able to demonstrate or parade without a permit. That's a permission from the city, town, or village, the local ordinance, where you are, where you're trying to do this. And you know what? This is for safety reasons, because the town, the city, the village, they need to know, how many people are we talking about? What roads are you going to be on? Is there a traffic issue? Is there a pedestrian issue? Among other things, there's other issues that could happen. You're not allowed to block public roads. And it goes back to your individual rights versus everybody else's individual rights. So you want to protest or demonstrate, you're not going to be allowed to block the roads, because I'm trying to go to work, and you don't have the right to stop me from going to where I'm trying to go. So there's a balancing act there. We want to protect people's rights to assemble and to protest and to demonstrate, but they have to follow everybody else's rights and the laws when they do so. And so that's the next bullet. It says interfering with another person's rights. And they can't violate any other city ordinances. So I already mentioned the loitering is just one example. And so this is basically the First Amendment 1 through 4, or the 4 protections. And this is a very introductory lesson into the First Amendment. But what I wish I had mentioned, and I'm going to do it now, I'm going to go all the way back up here to this slide here, the first 10 amendments. So what the heck is that? Basically, our forefathers wrote the Constitution of the United States, and it is this incredible document. And they were, a lot of brilliant minds went into it, and it is a document that is still relevant and used today. But when they got all done, they go, well, we forgot a couple things. Darn it. Like, we're all finished with the Constitution, but we just realized we forgot things. Actually, we forgot 10 of them. And that's why we have this amendments. These are like add-ons after the fact. So you have to think about who these people were, where they came from, what their history was, what their experiences were coming to this country, and what their motivations were when they wrote the Constitution and when they wrote the amendments. And basically, and now I'm really getting into history here, but it's really important. We know that the first European people to come here were from England. And England had a monarchy, right? The king, forever. And they didn't have the kinds of rights and freedoms that we enjoy. And in fact, today, many places still don't. So when you talk about freedom of speech, for example, you were not allowed to say you hated the king. You weren't allowed to say that. You would be killed. You would be on the spot killed if you said you hated the king, or you would be thrown in a dungeon for years, never to be seen again. Same thing with press. You couldn't write out that you hated the king and he was an idiot and he didn't know what he was talking about. You would be killed. You would be thrown in a dungeon. Compare that with today, or with here. With this country, really from day one. You can say we don't have a king, we have a president. You can say you don't like the president. In fact, many people do say that. You can't threaten the president, but you can call him every name in the book if you want to. You can say you don't like him. That's your right. That's your freedom. That's your First Amendment. And the reason our forefathers thought it was so important to write that in there is because they didn't have that freedom in England. They also didn't have the freedom of religion. The only approved religion was the Church of England. And you were not allowed to be anything else. If you practiced a different religion, you got arrested. You maybe got killed. You got thrown in a dungeon. So again, freedom of religion, be anything you want. Muslim, Baptist, Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, Buddhist, and a million others. But at that time in England, that was it, Church of England or nothing. And so that also goes with freedom of press. Wasn't only writing, things in the newspaper. It was also like religious teachings. If there was religious teachings that were not from the Church of England, you were killed, you were arrested. And freedom to assemble, get together. So what people did was they met in secret in houses at night under the cover of darkness to hold their religious meetings, to hide from the king's soldiers. And the soldiers, they knew that this was going on. They would try to find out. They would get wind of it, and they would go to people's houses and just burst in and catch them in the act of having a religious service and arrest them all. So that's where freedom to assemble comes from. It comes from, it's kind of, they're kind of combined. Freedom of religion and freedom to assemble at that time was because the people that were not of the Church of England, that had a different religion, they would get together in secret to try to practice their religion. And the king's soldiers would either kill them or arrest them and put them in dungeons, and that was it. So all of these things came from the history of where our forefathers had come from and what their experiences had been. So that's the history of it. It's important to understand that. And obviously, as our society has evolved and changed and gotten more sophisticated and more complicated, we are constantly revisiting these important documents to understand how do they apply in today's world. And that's also why we have the U.S. Supreme Court, because the U.S. Supreme Court helps define and apply these rules and these documents to today's society. So, and we're almost done here for the week. Nowhere near as long as last week's. So, our next amendment is the Second Amendment, and that's Roman numeral 2, which is capital I, capital I. And the Second Amendment is short and sweet. And again, you have the ear, you don't have to write this. This is the exact wording. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So, you have the right, generally, to have a gun. That's what an arm is, a gun, in this context. However, of course, there's exceptions. So, the Second Amendment, so I want you to write this down, the Second Amendment, number 2, Roman numeral 2, the right to bear arms. Own and possess firearms. Except, you must do so legally. And there's a lot of rules around what makes it legal. And I can tell you that you being licensed and the weapon being registered are 2 of the rules. So you have to do those things. You have to license it You have to be licensed and you have to register it. And then we also have rules about what kinds of weapons are legal and which kinds aren't. And each state actually has their own rules. Some states, like New York, are far more restrictive than other states. But federally, by the Constitution, we have the right to bear arms. And of course, this is one of those topics that can get very controversial. There's a whole lot of people that wishes we would just completely do away with firearms completely and nobody would have one at all. And then there are other people who are absolutely diehard. I will have a firearm for my own protection and I will never give up that right as is given to me in the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. So again, these are bigger conversations. We can talk about the pros and the cons of this issue. But for this video and for our notes, it's enough to just leave it there and get started with that. But that's it. So the Second Amendment has one thing and that's it. The right to bear arms. First Amendment has 4 things. Second Amendment has 1 thing. And now, so number 3, the Third Amendment, I'm not going to talk about because it doesn't really have anything to do with criminal justice. So even though there's 10 amendments, you don't need to know all 10 for me. You might need to know all 10 for your social studies teacher, your history teacher. But when I give you a quiz or a test, it won't have number 3 on it. It'll have 1, it'll have 2, and it'll have the next one, which is 4. The Fourth Amendment is the Mac Daddy. Do they even say that? The kids say that anymore. I don't even know. Like the biggest, fattest word I can think of to get across to you the importance of the Fourth Amendment. Everything, especially in law enforcement, but really throughout the whole criminal justice system, the Fourth Amendment is critical. If you don't remember any of the others, you got to remember the Fourth. Can I say that a few more times? Okay, so what does the Fourth Amendment? So the Fourth Amendment, the Roman numeral is IV, capital. And you got your ear here. So I've got the exact wording. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. So, there's a lot in that paragraph. And I'm going to break it down step by step for you. But this is something we will talk about all year long with different scenarios and different situations. If you remember your vocabulary from last week, one of your words was probable cause. And I told you then, this is a huge word that you need to know, and we're going to get into it a whole lot more. Well, here's the first time right here, probable cause, where you're seeing that term being used in the Fourth Amendment. So I'm going to give you examples, but before I move on, let's just kind of put this into plain English for today's world. The right of the people. Who are the people? The people are the United States citizens. That's who this is talking about when it says the people, the citizens. To be secure. That means safe and comfortable and private. You have the right, each of us individually has the right to be safe and comfortable and private in our person. What does that mean? In our person. It means your body. It means the things that you might have on you, in your clothing, in your pockets, okay? Your person is your body. So it's not only what you're carrying and what you have on you, but what about inside your body? What might the police investigators want from you that's inside your body? Well, I'm just going to tell you because because I have to. How about DNA? And I bet a bunch of you are like, oh, that's what I was thinking, DNA. Yeah, DNA comes from bodily fluids, spit, saliva, and semen. And if I wanted to get a sample, if I want to get a blood sample or a saliva sample from you so I can test your DNA to see if it matches DNA found at a crime scene, I need to have probable cause before I can't just take it from you. So that's an example. But your person is your body inside and out. Okay? You also have a right to be safe and secure and private in your house. Well, we don't only mean people that live in houses, right? Because some people live in apartments. And some people live in other kinds of places. If it is your home, so houses really means your home, wherever that is. It does need to be something that is traditionally seen as a home or a residence. Like you can't say, well, I'm living in my car right now. Your car is not going to have the exact same protection because a car isn't meant to be a home. But if you're not safe in your home, if you don't feel private and protected in your own home, where do you feel safe and protected? So people's homes are the most protected places under the law. We take that very seriously. To go into someone's home, you are going to need some pretty big reasons. And we'll get into those details later. Papers is any kind of document that you have, and it doesn't have to be actual paper. It could also be digital. Records and things like that. On these next slides, I'm going to give you more examples. And effects. Your effects is your stuff, the stuff that you own. So you have a right to be safe and private in your body, the place where you live, your personal documents and papers, and your stuff against unreasonable searches and seizures. So the police cannot search or take, which is a seizure, search or take, search or seize those things from you if it's unreasonable, and we can't violate that. And warrants, which we'll get into more later. There's two kinds of warrants. There's an arrest warrant and there's a search warrant. Shall issue. No warrant shall issue. That means be issued. No warrant shall be issued or signed by a judge. Sorry about that. But upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation. This is where the police officer who is applying for the warrant, the search warrant, the arrest warrant, they are swearing to the judge what their reasons are, that the reasons they have are true to their knowledge. And it's going to take quite a bit of evidence, quite a bit of proof for that judge to say, yes, you have enough, you have probable cause. And by the way, the judge is a lawyer. So it takes it out of the police's hands. They're not the end-all, be-all. They have another person looking at this that doesn't work for them, doesn't work with them. The judge is from the courts. And they're the only ones that can sign a warrant. And that warrant has to be signed by a judge or it is invalid. So they swear that the information they're giving, the reason why they want this warrant, they swear that the information is correct. And it says, the last part here, particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. And basically this means you have to be very, very specific about what you're looking for, where you're looking for it, and why you think it's in that location. And I have a ton of real life examples that we can talk about in class. So, Fourth Amendment, IV, protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. And I want you to write this down. And I just said all of this, but people have a right to be secure, private, in their person, papers, houses, and effects. So I want you to have this in your notes, and this is just a little picture here of a little piece of a search warrant. Again, pause the video to get this down, and then just hit play again when you're ready to keep going. I'm just going to keep going now. And so your person is your body inside and out. The police may not search your body, clothing you are wearing, items you are carrying, or obtain biological samples, hair, blood. Darn it, it's the mouse. My mouse is terrible. Or saliva, etc. Or arrest you without probable cause. And this last sentence is really important, and so many people don't know this or don't understand this. Having a warrant and having probable cause are not necessarily the same thing. To get the warrant, you have to have probable cause. But there are times that I don't need a warrant. I still need probable cause. That's always going to be true. That's always going to be the case. And we're going to get into exceptions to the warrant rule, I think, next week. But don't think that if the officer didn't have a warrant, automatically that's illegal. No, it depends. Depends on the circumstance. But they did need probable cause. Okay? So the last sentence here says this does not always mean that they need a warrant. So make sure you write this down. And this is really getting into nitty-gritty stuff. And if you need to reread or re-listen to this video or your notes, please do so, because this is really important stuff. And it's important that you guys get this. So our next slide, your papers are all of your personal and legal documents and records that are personal to you. And they, as I said, they can be paper or digital. So here are some examples: bank statements, health records, financial documents, letters, diaries or journals, wills, birth certificates, driver's license, etc. So I would like you to write this down. And again, this is not all inclusive, but probably the more common types of documents that a detective or police officer would want to get a hold of for an investigation. So, and your house, as I said, is where you live or where people typically sleep at night. And that is called a dwelling. A dwelling is where people typically sleep at night. And so that, of course, includes house and apartment, but it also includes hotel, motel rooms, dorm rooms, nursing home, wherever somebody lives. And there's more examples than that, but these are probably the most common. So the Fourth Amendment protection against unreasonable searches and seizures applies to these areas as well. And as I said, your effects is your stuff. all of your material possessions and things that you own. So we're almost done here. So examples: clothing, your clothing, furniture, electronics, vehicles, your cell phone, your iPad, your PC, whatever it is you own, because you never know what police might want to take a look at as it relates to a criminal investigation. And if they want to look at those things, they're going to have probable cause. Might need a warrant, might not, depends on the situation. But for right now, this is an introduction to amendments 1 through 4, 1, 2, and 4, and they most specifically affect the police officer on the street doing their job. And that is actually it. So these, this is a lot less notes than you had last week, but in some ways a lot more deeper information. Please make sure you write down questions that you have for me so we can discuss this in class together. And that's it. Bye.